we've heard so much about artificial intelligence, but in the last year, you've probably experienced it in a more tangible way and probably for your business. So there's a couple things that I think if I was you, I would want to come out with this. And the first thing is, what is this? Can we open up the hood and see what that is? And one of the reasons why I'm standing up here in front of you instead of anybody else is that I was a computer engineer first, and then I became a large animal veterinarian. So I understand both worlds, and I can combine those both worlds. So I'm hoping that as we go through this, this is a really tangible, understandable way to grasp some of the concepts of AI. You don't have to know everything, but just like a car, if you have the general idea of what's going on, then if your brakes break, you know if the mechanic is telling you the truth when he gives you the bill. So let's have a roadmap here. So how did we get here? How did this whole happen that CATTLEytics started? AI for the dairy industry. We're going to go through what it is, types of AI, a technology map, and then the future. And then I'm going to do some data modeling. So how we got here. So I was working as an engineer, and I grew up in a rural area, and I was working for IBM, running one of their big products, from a development point of view. And then I realized what I was doing was not connected with what I cared about at all. And what I cared about was agriculture, the community. And I started spending one day a week actually going out with a large animal vet and doing cow calls, this kind of stuff. And I found every day when I did that, we would show up there, we would understand a new situation, and I just thought dairy combined all of the most interesting things together. So it connects biology, it connects management, it connects business, it connects so much, and it is way more complex than we often give dairy farmers credit for. So I went to vet school, I became a large animal vet, but it was really when I started working with dairy farmers, farmers like Ben here, where I started saying, hey, well, can I take a look at your data? And so I worked in the nuclear industry in between applying for vet school and starting vet school, and that was really tied to preventative maintenance. I don't know if you know what preventative maintenance is, but it's understanding situations before they're about to collapse. Really interesting concept, because of course you don't want a nuclear reactor, you don't want it going bad. So they spent a lot of effort being very proactive. And I was thinking, could we apply that to dairy? So a dairy farmer I'd known really well, I said, well, can I take all your data and see what I can do? So I took all his data, and I did what I did in engineering, was I modeled the data to see what happened. And when I modeled the data, I could get within about 3% of his milk with his somatic cell count. Everything was modeling out pretty well. And I was like, this is really cool. And so I was sitting there one spring morning, the light streaming in, beautiful spring day in his little office. And then I remember going through and being like, yeah, checks out, checks out. And then I got to October of the year before, and his data didn't fit. All of those models that I felt so proud about, it didn't work. And then I looked at the year before, and the same thing. October hit, and it went off the rails. And I showed him, like, there was a day when things went off. And so I asked him, I said, what's going on here? And he looked at the numbers, and he's like, October, I don't know, it wasn't really hot. We didn't have heat stress. I didn't introduce new animals. Does anybody know what might go wrong in October? You got it. Yeah. So it was green corn silage was the answer. He had run out of feed, and he had next year's crop there, and he opened it early. And he knew, like, he shouldn't do that, but he did it anyways because he didn't, the prices were really high, and to buy in more feed would have been bad. So there was a fork in the road, and he thought he took the better fork. But I said, well, the issue is in October. The issue is that your milk from October to February never caught up. It wasn't until February the next year that caught up, because you have these lactation curves, and if you hit those lactation curves early in those lactations, what happens to the rest of the lactation? The rest of the entire lactation is dropped down, right? You almost never get back up to your potential once you hit a cow early on in a lactation. And so he was a small dairy farmer, and I was like, I quantified that was about $30,000 you lost. And he'd never made that same decision again. And it wasn't that, I mean, maybe he should have had more feed, had more runway to start with. But when you have those hard decisions, if you have those forks in the road. If you had dollar signs beside each one of those forks and it was easy, you'd be prepared. And that's what a lot of this is. It was finding ways, like you all know what you need to do. Can we give you the tools to do this? This story isn't about us. The story is about you and what you're trying to achieve, and we're just giving you those tools so that you can achieve it. So, I mean, this is Ben here, and when he has a new calf, do you know what he does? Is he goes into his WhatsApp group, and he writes on WhatsApp. He says, you know, can you give this calf an extra dose of extra feeding of colostrum? And he writes it there, and then what happens? What happens when he goes back and he goes to have dinner at his house? He's scrolling through his WhatsApp, and he's like, I don't know that they actually did that. Tries to call the guy, can't get through to the guy. He's like, did he actually give that or not? He's got to go out. He's got to leave his dinner, go out, fix the situation, and go back, right? Why does Ben have numbers on? Do you have numbers on your hand? have you had? Your son has numbers on his. Does anybody in the room have numbers? Why? These are cow numbers, right? This is your fancy filing system. And I was like, huh, it's all good until, you know, you have a slightly smudged number, right? The calendars look like this. And it's not bad, except for the fact that as you start to grow, people are taking pictures of this and then sending it out because there was a change, and then you got lots of pictures. And this all is technology. Writing on a whiteboard is technology, but is it working? What do you think that is? Protocol, yeah, protocol binder. How many times do you think your staff a day go into that protocol binder and refer to those protocols? I've seen a lot of dusty binders. Right? So enter CATTLEytics. So as I say, our job isn't to be the hero here. You're already the hero, right? Our job is just to be the tools. It's like James Bond, and we'll be Q, and was it Q? And give you those, you know, the cool set of tools so that you're prepared. Trouble comes, you know what to do. Trouble will keep on coming, but you're set up because you haven't just seen the trouble, but you have set up systems that will deal with this. So we want to help dairy farmers care for their herd with that same attention to detail that their farmers cared for their grandparents cared for their 12 cows. We can take away the data heavy lifting so that you can get back to your cows. Not everybody should have to be a computer scientist or a data analytics person to get that answer. So this is our team. We really align tech and dairy expertise. We've been in a lot of press, a lot of podcasts, but we do three things really well. One is we're creating a digital twin of a dairy. Digital twin is kind of a fancy way of saying that we're creating a copy of what happens in real life. All of those processes, all of those products, all of those things we represent in our software. Secondly, we're streamlining your team. So everybody should show up knowing how to do it, what to do it, when to do it. And third, well, we're trying to make that hard data stuff really easy for you so that when you're at that fork in the road, you've got a partner who can say, hey, this is what the cost is. So this is a sample of our software. You can take a look through. That's what I mean about being very visual. You can see the cows. We try to represent everything really almost like a sports team. So our concept with this is basically that, has anybody seen the movie Moneyball? There's a couple people. Okay, so Moneyball was all about putting together your team, your best baseball team with not necessarily the players that look like all-stars, but the players that had the stats that really work for you. And when you took those players in, that was the Oakland Days, was it? Somebody knows. Yeah, they ended up winning with almost no budget because they knew the players to choose. So we're setting up your herd for the next season. We've got protocols, and our protocols are AI-enabled protocols too. So artificial intelligence is baked all the way through this. So you can put a few words in it for making up a protocol, press enter, and it'll create not only a step-by-step direction, but it'll translate it into whatever language you want. We think that we need to see people first, and so if you are, let's say, a Spanish worker showing up to a farm for a first day, and you don't know what you're doing, and nothing's in your language, and there's issues potentially reading things, you can't not be set up. I don't see that as being a barrier. It shouldn't be a barrier to people being set up on the farm. So, and then we've got a task manager. The task manager was because of that WhatsApp headache. People didn't want to be dealing with WhatsApp. They want something simple, big buttons, really easy. You can put in just, one or two words, and you can say, feed cow, second feeding of colostrum. That goes in. It goes into a list. We use kind of like, if anybody's familiar with a Kanban approach, that goes into a whiteboard, and then the whiteboard displays for everybody exactly what's happening. So it's an environmental thing to keep everybody on the same page. These are things that you already want to do on your dairies. Again, we're just creating the tools to do them. We also have shift schedules. A farm in Saskatchewan came to me and said, do you know what? I'm about to use restaurant software in order to schedule my workers. Can you please help? So we iterated through with them. We talked to them about what they wanted, and we created a dairy-specific shift scheduler for them, and they love it. The results are in. We have a dairy-specific staffing tool. We make progress for researchers that work with us because we bring data from lots of different streams. It's a game changer for dairies. And when we went into the farms that we work with, I put the example of a 500 cow dairy because it's right in the middle. They save money on everybody, but they mostly save money on their senior staff. So their senior cow managers, their senior farm owners, those are the ones that get the load taken off of them. And then everybody else feels more confident because they know what to do. So, when you're looking at a labor cost, everybody has issues with labor. This is just easy. So this is our team, but let's get into AI. I wanted you to know first who we are, what we do, what we make, so that it gives you context. But again, the goal of this isn't just to talk about that. The goal is that you have a bit of a school, an AI 101. So I want you to understand what is AI, what isn't, have a general understanding of some types of AI, understand where it's being used in dairy, and ideally come out of this talk and be more confident when you're talking about the topic and when you're assessing technologies. So whatever you're best at, you're probably better than AI. So use AI to help you with every other aspect of what you do. Lots of stuff that AI is good at is the stuff that you hate the most. So it doesn't have to be this comparison between you and AI. If it's doing better than you, then I think maybe you should go into a different business. You do better at what you do best. But there's lots of stuff it can take away and it can help you with. And just like, when we went from hand saws to electric saws, there's benefits of a hand saw, but an electric saw is pretty handy if you're building a house, right? As new tech comes on, just know what it is and know when the appropriate time is to use the right tool. So, AI is a part of computer science that builds systems to handle tasks that usually need human smarts, like spotting patterns in data, making decisions, understanding speech, or learning from past experience, much like how you'd adjust farming practices based on what you've learned over time. But if it doesn't allow you to think like a human, it's not AI. There's a lot of AI washing going on, and it's used everywhere because everybody wants to be doing it. And sometimes it's just kind of not really AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide it into topics. And again, why am I doing this? Because what I want you to do is to be able to walk around here afterwards and see, oh, this is this technology. I know where this fits. This is that technology. I know where that goes. That's helpful when you're thinking through these technologies. So we're going to talk about 5 main ones. One has a section. You don't have to go into that. But if you can remember these 5 types of AI, it'll just help provide a framework. One is machine learning. Next is natural language processing. That's like large language models. Third is computer vision. Fourth is robotics. And fifth is expert systems. So machine learning. That's learning from data, making predictions without using fixed rules. This is the most school-heavy part of what I'm talking about today, but I think it still is relatively intuitive because all of this is getting computers to think the way that you already think. So the first one is neural networks. So machine learning is neural networks. I'm going to go through random forest, time series forecasting. Those are 3 types of machine learning. I can go into other types too, but these are the ones that I see in dairy the most. So neural networks. So this is all about distinguishing patterns of what you see. So you walk into a pen. It has 1 calf and several cows. How do you tell which cow just calved? And I'm going to ask you questions here. So you see one calf, couple cows. Anybody, what do you see? What do you look for? How do you tell which one's the mother? Yeah, you could look for that. Yeah. You could look for a bit of blood, right? Maybe some bruising, right? But it could be hard. You're looking between the two. What about white line disease from an abscess? When you look at that hoof, how do you tell? What goes on in your head when you see the difference? Or what's the difference between straw and hay? How do you look at straw and hay and tell which is which? And so this is going to be a little thought experiment here, okay? So this is something that computers traditionally have found extremely hard to do. So they were good at numbers, they were good at really specific exact things, but some of the stuff, like for instance, being able to tell the difference between a dog and a cat, computers were terrible at. And so what that meant is that computers were limited in what they could do and how helpful they could be because they couldn't do those basic things that you could take 2 seconds to do. Okay, so what is this? What is that? What is this? What is that? What is that? Okay. When you were on the more difficult ones, what was happening in your brain? In your brain, if I look at my own brain and what was happening, I'm like, well, is it straw or hay? I see a lot of yellow, but then there looks like there's seed heads, but it doesn't look that coarse, but you're taking all of those things you know about those 2 attributes, and you're weighing them. You're actually weighing those attributes. And that's what neural networks do. They looked at the way that human brains worked, and what we do is we apply a series of filters over these things of what we know about that object. We know about the coarseness, we know about the texture, we know about the seed heads, we know about the color. And so we actually create filters, and each time we go through a filter, we weigh the importance of that element of it. And at the end of it, we come out with an answer, and it's our best guess. So neural networks do this. But the thing is, if they come out with the wrong answer, they circle back, they reweigh everything, and they try again. So image after image after image is passed through, and they find out, was I right or wrong? And then they reweigh all of those elements. So this kind of concept, what does this allow computers to do? It allows them to see all kinds of patterns, right? It allows them to see, an animal walking through perhaps under an overhead camera to be able to pick up their mobility, right? It helps them be able to see if a cow just calved, what's happening. It looks at those patterns, and then it learns from a giant data set, and then it goes to your farm, and it applies that to your data set. So when it comes to this, it's like sorting hay from straw, right? You build more confidence with layers. What are the important questions you should ask if somebody's doing a neural network? Because it's still people that say, what are those filters that I think are the most important? It's still people that say, I think color's important, texture's important, and they're the ones that populate that. And it's still people that choose that data set that it learns from. So if that data set is based on, Angus cattle, and they're using it in dairy cattle, it might not work as well because it's learned on a different set of data. So understanding what it's learned on and how it's been set up, you can ask a few questions to try to get an idea of what's going on. Next is a random forest. This is number 2. Again, this is the heavy stuff. We'll get through it. We'll get to the light stuff. So this is, again, like, when should I harvest my alfalfa? So you're a brand new farmer. You got some fields. You put some alfalfa in. You have no clue on this. So you're going to call some friends up, right? So you call up first off, you call Rob. And Rob says, we probably don't want to do 4 cuts because then you have a lot more to arrange. So you probably just want to cut when it's early flower or maybe late flower. Maximize your 3 cuts. Okay, Rob. Do you guys agree with Rob? Anybody have alfalfa in there? Okay. So they're looking at the early flower, late flower. But then you talk to Tim, and Tim's a thinker. Tim says, you know what? I want to get as much protein as possible. Then I don't have to buy an extra soy. I want to have great quality from my fields instead of buying it. So I like to get 4 cuts in. So if I were you, I'd focus on the date. But first week of June, unless they flower early. Do you guys like Tim? And he's trying to maximize the quantity versus the protein percentage. Then you talk to Jim. He's like, I want the largest yield, limited labor, so I'm going to cut in late flower, early seed pod. I just want to get lots. And you talk to Harold, and he says, well, it doesn't really matter because you don't have the people, right? So you have to make sure you got the people lined up. You can make whatever plan you want, but there's a lot to organize. And then Esther, we ask her, and she says, well, I see Mark starting to cut in the next field. So that means it's going to rain. I wouldn't cut. So what you do is you take all of these decisions. It's called a random forest because these are decision trees. And you take all of those decision trees and you weigh those decision trees. There might be an expert in California, but if you're living in Wisconsin, that's going to have very little bearing on how you make that decision. So you weigh it based on their expertise, but also based on their location. And so random forest is a type of AI where it weighs those decisions and helps you make decisions. Final one is time series forecasting. I'm not really going into a big, I can go into that a little bit later if anybody's interested, but it basically helps you with the seasonality to prepare for the future. So it looks at things like, trends, cycles, seasonality, variability, and it's very predictive forward. So it looks at the history and helps you forward predict. Okay, so the next one, we got through machine learning. So the next, you probably have a lot more experience on, which is natural language processing. So that's understanding and creating speech and language. How many people here have used either like ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity? How many of you have used something like that? I almost want to ask if anybody hasn't. A year ago, I don't think almost anybody would have put their hand up. And you might have come to a talk like this and said, what is this voodoo? Like, I don't know about this. But then you're like, it's kind of handy for this. And it summarized this PDF for me pretty well. I think now the world has already changed 1 year in because we all have personal experiences with this. So using generative chatbots, a lot of us have learned it's a lot about the prompts that we put in it. If you put in a good prompt, you get out something decent. So it's an aid. It's not a replacement. You still need you. You can't replace you. Use it as a tool, not a substitute. We're going through the exact changes that we went through when the internet came out and you could Google search things, right? We freaked out a bit. We were like, kids from schools, they won't be using libraries anymore. We did the same thing when calculators came in. Should they be allowed in math classes? We've been through this, and we keep on going through this. It's the same thing. It has to be in the right place. References have to be checked. We know this better than we think we do. privacy matters, right? Avoid sharing sensitive farm information. Double check your info. This is predictive, right? So, there's examples where somebody asked about a case, and it gave a really convincing law case that was a precedent-setting one. So convincing, it didn't exist, right? It's predicting the best chance of that thing existing, and it's going to be way more positive than you expect it to be. Data limitations. If it doesn't have great data quality, it's going to be limited. It also changes based on who you are, and it will filter out data based on who it thinks you are. Using your own data, you can upload some of your own data too. Not every piece of data on your farm is like, it needs to be under lock and key. Make sure that you use it where it makes sense, and watch for outdated info. So, one of the examples is like create a protocol for bottle washing. So, what's on the agenda? If you start to do something like a bottle washing protocol, you can just say, create a bottle washing protocol. But do you know what I did right after this? Is I said, hey, ChatGPT, can you create me a great prompt for bottle washing? And it created me a great prompt. And then I just used that prompt. So you can ask it to tell you what you don't know. If it's not good, go back and ask it to be better. Ask it to translate it into Spanish. Test it out with a Spanish friend, or if you're Spanish, read it. And for instance, when I asked it to make its own protocol, it created me this really nice side-by-side comparison for bottle washing. It actually did a much better job. What it's going to do is it's going to look for the most common way to predict the answer. The most common way isn't always the best. So you have to push it to be the best. Say, speak in the voice of the top experts. And ask for references. Right? You can ask for references for anything and then go check those references. And this is a great way to connect to those data sources and just say, oh, I didn't even think of that. Okay, prompt ideas. So ask AI to make you a prompt first, ask for references, ask for translations, ask AI to tell you the biggest potential fixes or opportunities they see on your farm with your protocols, So when you're writing a prompt, a good prompt is asking yourself, who's going to be reading this information? Do you have a clear goal? Be specific and contextual. Mention all the things about your dairy. Ask for specific outputs. I want it to be actionable. I want it to be quick, step by step. Include constraints or conditions. Talk about your location, low cost, high biosecurity. Be open to refining your prompts based on their output. One thing I think a lot of people don't know is that a lot of this information you can actually set up in your account to start with, and then every single prompt will be in the voice of the top nutrition experts or something, So if you set that up to start, then every question that you get to from then on will be better. There's a lot of different versions of this. Try some different ones. If you haven't tried it, try something. But these are some examples of common large language models. Some give you pictures, there's lots of different things. We've integrated it here with our protocol creation so that if you wanted to create a protocol in here, you can just write a few words like feed calf colostrum, press on the magic button, and it creates you step-by-step instructions. So you don't have to use this. You can go to ChatGPT, but we want things to be really easy for farmers, and then they can have that in their pocket and have all their whole list of protocols, all their protocol library in the hands of everybody working on that farm. We also have AI in that we have something, if you've heard of Copilot, we have Cowpilot. So you can go in and you can say, can you plot my mastitis for 2024, 2025? And it'll plot your mastitis. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because we're trying to make it easy and accessible for dairy farmers, for nutritionists, for veterinarians to be able to jump over that gap of that data hurdle. You shouldn't have to sit at your computer for 2 hours to get something like this. The third part is computer vision. So computer vision, NEAT was out here, it allows computers to analyze images or videos and recognize patterns or objects. So that's overhead cameras. It could be things like, seeing whether or not a cow is calving. It's really fascinating how many companies are going into computer vision, but part of that is because you can't be everywhere you want to on a dairy, and this helps you then see what's happening when you're not there all the time. So cow identification, in-barn events, feeding time and feed distribution, body condition scoring, mobility and lameness, milking parlor protocol adherence for employees. Fourth one is robotics. Allows robots to adapt to their environment to make better decisions. There's lots, almost every robotic milker is either working on AI or they have AI integrated. And that's things like, you know, optimized teat attachment for milking robots. It's again that pattern matching and then that iterative process to get better, right? Enhanced throughput, continuous learning. The fifth one is expert systems. So there's some groups working on, like Bayer piloted a generative AI tool for agriculture. I would say expert systems is the one I maybe feel like it's still in the future, because I still don't, people need to be at the center of these things. But you know, there's knowledge limitations, data dependencies, limited adaptability, complex problem solving. But at the same point in time, could this be a tool for your experts to use? Yes, but I think you can't take the people out of it. So that was a whirlwind. You just went through all 5 types of artificial intelligence. You had examples. You have a concept of neural networks. That was our straw and hay, right? We talked a bit about random forests. That was our alfalfa decision tree example. We talked a bit about time series forecasting. That's all in the machine learning. We talked about natural language processing. A lot of that was, you know, talking about ChatGPT because it's the most common one. But, you know, when you're talking to Google or anything like that, that's the same type of stuff. Computer vision, that's a lot of the lameness detection, robotics, expert systems. So now, when you go out there and you hear about AI, AI is so big, you can at least put it into buckets. But a lot of these overlap. So you might find that some computer vision in the back end actually have those neural networks that help connect it. You might find that they also have large language models that overlap with things like machine learning so that you can talk and it understands and gets you back a better prompt. There's some companies out there that do this. I put a couple on here. There's probably more. If you know of one that's better, please, I'll add it to my list. I mean, I think we all do well in the industry if we're all doing better as time goes on. So I'm excited that people are testing this out because I want the dairy industry to be at the forefront of whatever's new, assessing it. Maybe some things work, maybe they don't. But unless we try it, sometimes fail at things and try it again, we're not going to keep on progressing. Okay. So that's understanding AI, what it is and isn't, have a general understanding of some types, understand where AI is being used in dairy. I've got one more section to go into. I think I've got about 5-10 minutes left. But if you have questions about this after, I'm happy to talk about it. Esther's also at the back. But there's challenges. There's a lot of a future in it. I'm going to go over one thing on data modeling. And this is important because I think as much as we use AI, the models we can use in dairy are actually that's foundational to AI. We can do so much more if we have really good systems and equations to represent what we already know. And then we can use things like machine learning on top of it. So dairy data is challenging. Staggered calvings, parity mix, cow variation, dry periods, external stressors. When you have lots of lactation curves, so this is a lactation curve, if you have lactation curves once a week or once a month, your milk output is going to be vastly different. In here, you're going to have a massive peak in milk, whereas here it's going to be distributed. You know, people time when they actually get their cows pregnant in order to have that distribution, and they just keep with the cycle. But if you don't, or if there's more lactation 1 versus lactation 3, it can get very difficult to predict what's going on. So we don't want to, so what we end up doing as a company is we do a lot of regression models. So these are lactation curves. So what we do is we actually take data points and we run this for each of the dairies that we're working with, and we go backwards in time to then look at their history, and instead of just having points, these are milk quantities, instead of having points on a graph, if we can represent that as an equation, then we can start to compare equations. Then we can start to use equations in machine learning. Then we can start to do lots of really cool stuff. So you can compare historic lactation curves in a way where you couldn't compare dots on a graph. So if we have a question like, are we losing cows by breeding, losing milk by breeding cows too early, right? I can go to a journal article, and I take a look at this. And I see this journal article tells me that I lose persistency if I breed cows too early. Okay, well, I probably shouldn't do that. So, but what about on my farm? What is the actual effect? So we ran the data, and we found something similar. In fact, we didn't find that it was just, this is one specific place. This may not apply to you. You might not have the same effect. But we found that, yeah, do you know what? If cows were bred at 110 days of milk, right, they actually made more milk, not just at the tail end, but they made more milk after all. This is 0 days of milk. That's 350 days of milk over there. So they made more milk than animals that were bred earlier. Okay, maybe I shouldn't breed my cows so early. And I found in lactation 2 to lactation 3, same issue, but not quite as profound. In lactation 3 to lactation 4, a little bit of the issue, only really saw it on persistency. But this doesn't mean anything unless I actually put it together as a system. So this is where once we have equations and we can put the equations together as a system, we can partner up those data points and then see how does my 30 days look next to my 60 day. So this is the subsequent milk production if you breed cows at about 30 days versus about 60 days. Well, you know, this one does look better, but once I start to take into account things like the dry period, you know, and I do my cumulative milk, it actually isn't that much different. I add in my 80 days, I add in my 110 days, and what I found was something that looked like a really terrible effect actually isn't that much of a big deal. On this dairy, with this data, take all of the, but it's not until we modeled all of that out and we saw what happened multiple years that we said, you know, kind of it doesn't matter. You know, in fact, I might want to breed a little earlier because then I have more of a shot at hitting it some of the other times. We started to make decisions based on this. But it wasn't until we did the data models that we could actually make these decisions. And especially when you're talking about multiple years and complex information, this is really hard. So in the end, we found 60 days, when you breed a cow at 60 days of milk, she did the best. But if I just took what I read and I didn't, and took what I saw straight up and left it at that, I wouldn't have made that conclusion at all. So we are not only doing this for data modeling on specific examples, but we actually have created a view where you can take multiple dairies, combine that data together, model that data together, and see what happens on a system. So we're really excited about this. It really makes it easier, too, for organizations that want to talk to multiple dairy farmers to be able to come out and give them the best advice possible. Because right now, there's a barrier between their experts that they trust and the farms themselves. So we have something for anybody in the industry. But if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. I went through the data modeling piece a bit fast, so if you're from a university, that was probably like, oh yeah, of course. If you're not used to looking at lactation models, maybe that was a bit quick. But maybe I'll see if there's any questions. Yeah?
Can I connect it with DairyCom or something like this to use my data that I have from the years before? Like
we can connect it with lots of different data sources. So yeah, and I'll meet with you later to talk about that. For any data that can be exported, we can connect to. Yeah?
I was, is this, yeah. I was curious about the protocol making and the do the magic bottom.
Yeah.
Like, so you feed references, like research-based reference into that, so it does make the magic based on like,
So we do have a reference library as well. I didn't
Okay.
show that. So we do have as part of our application a place where we put trusted sources and put that in. That specific protocol, we didn't connect with that because often what you find is the trusted sources for those tend to be people want protocols that people can really understand. And sometimes some of the research papers tend to be a little bit cerebral, dare I say. So if they're like, grab that bucket and do this, it doesn't necessarily help them. But what we do is we do pre-populate it. So there's a concept of a context window. So we do put into the context window whatever we think would be good for that dairy. So we make it custom for that specific dairy and say, if this and this and this is important for them, if they like everything that comes out of Penn State, or if they like everything that comes out of DHMS, then that can be in the context window, and then that will come custom to them.
For little farmers that maybe don't have a lot of Internet of Things, it can be a really challenging to get all of the investment to start getting all the data from the animals. But from your point of view, what are the three most important data that you need to start and take really good decisions that
Yeah.
in the future it's going to have a return of the investment?
It's interesting. I mean, I know that is some dairies, they've gone back and forth. I do love daily milk weights if you have them because it's so nice to correlate them with things like feed costs. There's things we can do off like just the milk pickups, and we can interpolate that into the herd. But that's a nice way because then even if you have points in time for fat and protein, we can then create a profile for your farm for each of the lactations based on the fat and protein, and then we can apply that across and test that. So I do like milk weights. I mean, you have to have the treatment, like decent treatment information for any of the things that are financially important. And then keeping track of when you're changing things, right? When did we change this ration from this to this? You know, when did we move these animals to the maintenance ration? Keeping track of even the vague points, because then what we can do is we can look at a point in time and say, what did that decision mean in dollars and cents? Yeah, it's a good question.
For farmers who are more wary of AI, what is like the tool that has changed the most minds that you've seen?
I think people, as soon as they start playing around with ChatGPT, they're like, oh, I can do this? Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, I was talking about, I did a similar talk in Manitoba, and a couple dairy farmers in the corner that I kind of knew, but they went into ChatGPT for the first time ever. This was last year. And they said, make a dehorning protocol, but make it funny. And then they're laughing in the corner because it's like start the Mission Impossible music, cue up the dairy. And I think I think the thing with tech is that's when where people can like go home, play around with it, get a sense of it pretty easily. I would say that OpenAI has done a lot more with numbers, and I don't think people have played around with numbers as much. So you can now give it a fair bit of data, and again, be careful with giving data, that's important, but a fair bit of data, and it will actually analyze it for you. So, so the data analysis piece of that, I think people haven't played as much with, but I think that's the most accessible type of AI. A lot of the other ones have to be integrated into a piece of hardware or some other aspect. Yeah, good question. Okay.
Maybe
we're at
one question here. If someone has questions later on, where are we?
Where are we? Okay. So we're a team that loves to work through problems. So if you have problems, come talk to us. We're over at the tent just across from there.
Or the egg is next to us. TC219.
Yeah, they're next to us. So we're just facing this building with our booth. Come sit, talk about like what I don't know, it's like dairy therapy. Tell me what your problems are, and we'll see what we can do. But I just appreciate your attention and talking about these really interesting topics with you today. Thanks very much.